Hi, Misha here, and in kind of the first half of this video, Jay gave you 4 reasons why to buy or why he owns the Czech Vz.58. And again, we've talked about this rifle ad nauseum on this channel, and there isn't much new to talk about as we move into February. And we both had some extra range clips of us shooting these from last year and figured, man, use them on something and to revisit it. It's been a while. Let's have some fun. So he kind of gave you 4 positives. Here, I want to give 4 negatives, or at least things to consider before you run out and buy one. So I definitely am playing devil's advocate a bit, but I also want to be sincere, because if this was just a joke, it would have very little value. But these are things that I think you might want to consider before buying one of these. So I have my usual ones out, although the paratrooper's in the bag at the moment. First off, number 1, and this has to do with really the original design, and this informs a lot of what will come later. When designing this in the 1950s, the Czechs really didn't know what they wanted. And this led to some very strict size and weight requirements, or rather restrictions. The Vz.58 is not like the AK. The AK was designed to be an assault rifle, an infantry rifle. The Vz.58 straddled the line between assault rifle and submachine gun. It really, it even started off with some of the earliest prototypes as being an open bolt. So when they gave specifications, it had to be very light and very compact. This resulted in a barrel under 15.5 inches. And they had to do everything they could to save weight, including a relatively light profile barrel, a lightweight receiver that had to use a striker firing system instead of hammer, and very compact, lightweight furniture, because this was perhaps going to be issued in some instances in place of a submachine gun. And also, because the whole kit was part of the weight, was built with these lightweight 30-round aluminum alloy magazines. So like a lot of things, it tries to fill 2 roles. The M14 trying to fill 4. This tried to fill those 2. There are compromises. And to be fair, the Czechs designed the Vz.58 not so much because they knew they could make something better than the AK, but because they wanted to be independent from Soviet Russia. And sometimes this independence works out well, for example, with the Vz.58, to be honest, or the Vz.61 Scorpion, but sometimes it does not. For example, the Vz.52 pistol, or perhaps the SA-24-26 submachine gun. So yeah, their whole impetus behind doing this was a little bit more of a political measure than anything else. And therefore, it's not the perfect assault rifle or submachine gun. Vz.58, just because I wanted to. Number 2, size and firing rate. Again, related to its nature. Here's the paratrooper with its folding stock, like you saw on Jay's. This stock in and of itself is a compromise for lightweight, which it does well, but it is not comfortable, especially for the old chin weld or cheek weld. Even the standard fixed stock, while it has much better of a cheek weld area, still steel butt plate, and it's actually a very short length of pull. Now, some would say, oh, this was done because Europeans are much shorter. Yes, but it was also mostly done because of the weight and size restrictions. Shorter stock, less weight. The pistol grip, likewise, is a nice ergonomic curvy shape, but it too is quite small. Continuing on with the small theme, we have a pretty small charging handle, cocking handle, small mag catch. It's actually a little bit hard to access because of the trigger guard, but again, all done to meet demands. And the same goes with the handguards. These are very thin, lightweight handguards. They don't give much room for your hand to grip, and you really need room here because of the light barrel and the way the gas system is designed. These heat up, even semi-automatic versions like these heat up very quickly in rapid fire. In select fire and full auto, they can get hot very fast. They also take a very lightweight style of bayonet. It's only useful as a dagger, not as a utility knife. And likewise, as you see here, if you're in the US, because of that 15.4-inch barrel, you have to make some decisions. You can't just roll with it unless you feel like filing an SBR stamp for 0.6 inches, which not very many of us do. Vz.58 never disappoints. Number 3, parts. Kind of disassembly and reliability and all that. For any of those of you who own an AK, which I'm going to assume is pretty much anyone who's a regular on this channel, you know how elegantly simple they are to disassemble, how large and robust the parts are, and how difficult it would be to actually lose anything during routine cleaning or maintenance. But the Vz.58 is more Germanic. It's not as bad as German over-engineering, but much more so than an AK. You have to pop this pin out in the back. Luckily, it is captive at least. And this comes off. We have 2 springs. Again, the striker has to be forward. Slide this out. So here is our... I'm gonna knock you over. Bet I caught you. Here's our striker group here. Much finer parts, and these are held in with kind of E-clips. So a little more involved. Taking the bolt out, it comes out as kind of an assembly. Striker is here. It hits the thing. And it comes apart. The striker usually stays in your bolt carrier. Of course, you can remove it if you need to. But then we have our bolt here, and this is our wedge for locking. And guess what? And this is, conscripts here. You can put this in and put it back in your gun without this piece. It can be reassembled without its locking part and fired. You see the firing pin sticking out. I've also seen a few of the firing pins on the parts kits that are broken. Not many, but more than I've seen on AK kits. Likewise, the AK gas system, the long stroke, is pretty much just all attached to the carrier. For this, it's another pin here to remove our handguard. And then we have our piston here, short stroke, as you note. And here, where the piston is pretty solid, we have another part that can be lost or not. Happened to me. There we go. Or not installed when you put it back together. The spring that goes on the end of the pin. So there's two parts that you could theoretically either lose in the field that aren't terribly large, or forget to install if you've been hitting the vodka a little hard. It's certainly a simplistic gun compared to some others. However, it is more complex, less durable, and less reliable, with more fine, small parts than an AK. And finally, especially from a military's point of view, more expensive than an AK. We found a loose one round on the table, and one of the advantages of the VZ, you can just top it up from the top. Number 4. The liabilities of, I guess you would say, civilian ownership in America. Limited availability and potential confusion over which one to get. Jay mentioned the Century Vz.58. That's probably the most common Vz.58 semi-auto. Those are built by Century Arms, or were built by Century Arms, on a new U.S. receiver using a new 16-inch U.S. non-chrome line barrel. But there have been plenty of others. Ohio Ordnance Works did some other kit builds. Ohio Rapid Fire did some kit builds. I think Wiselight did some, if memory serves. And of course, then there's all the Czech guns. The first ones to come in were built by D Technic over there, who changed their name to Czech Small Arms, CSA, around 2011. And there's a myriad of importers and brands on these, from CZ USA to Waffen Works to TGI. Even Century Arms imported some D-Technics. And of course today, Checkpoint is the name on. But even there, within Checkpoints, you have a few different styles. You have some older D-Technics that they brought in. You have some newer ones. And you have ones that they assembled here, but using original Czech receivers. And for a long time, that was the only way to get one that had the original barrel. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if you want to have the original barrel, which is chrome line called hammer forge, you have to put something on the end or file an SBR stamp. And one last thing about the D-Technic assembled guns here, you have the bayonet lug. For the longest time, the imports had no bayonet lug. And if they had the original barrel, you still had to do something. Some of them came in with a simple cap. Others, like this, they went ahead and put on the muzzle brake. We've done quite a few breakdowns on all the variations. So you had to kind of decide, what features do you want? Because you can get some that have the German Walther barrels, not called Walther, the other Walther, which are chrome line called hammer forged in 16.1 inches. And they let you access the threads. But yeah, you have to kind of decide. The barrel thing's a bit of an issue. So it's a little confusing as to which is the best one. And, you know, best is always subjective. On top of that, sometimes it's a case of beggars cannot be choosers, because they've always been limited availability. CSA is a small company. Checkpoint USA is a small company. And, unlike the AK that was produced in dozens of nations, into the millions, the Vz.58 was only produced in one nation, not quite 900,000, with many of those lost to time. So when you find the guns, yeah, you're going to pay a bit. And you can't just snap your fingers and get one. On top of that, because of the production, things like the mags. These do not take AK mags. In fact, they take no AK parts, because this is in no way an AK. It just happens to fire the same 760x39 projectile. The magazines have always been difficult to find, at least compared to AK mags, and they've been at least 20 to 30 bucks for years now, sometimes higher. The only time they really got reasonably cheap, $10, $15, is when Century imported a large batch. Shoot, a decade ago. And the same can be said for spare parts. You saw the little things. If you were to lose your piston spring or part of your bolt, Checkpoint's about your only source for new condition spare parts. If you want used condition spare parts, you can buy a parts kit. But who knows what you'll get. And the same thing can be said for furniture. If you think this stock is too short or uncomfortable, there are replacements, and as Jay said, there is an aftermarket for these, but it's nothing like the AK aftermarket and a pale, pale shadow of how large the AR-15 aftermarket is. So while you might find a different stock for your Vz.58, it might not be the exact model, flavor, variant, style you want. And the same thing can be said for scope rails. This one has one. Some earlier ones weren't even drilled and tapped for scope rails. And even the ones that come in with them, they take their own scope rail and thus adapter. So attaching an optic, it can be more work than an AK and infinitely a lot more work than on an AR. So my point is, customizing it is going to be more time, more money, more energy, and probably more compromises, much as the original Czech military did, compromising with this between being a submachine gun and an assault rifle. An American owner might find themselves compromising for what exactly it's meant to do, or not always being able to find enough mags or spare parts to make them feel warm and fuzzy. And I could go on, but I think that's, things to consider if you're buying one. Of course, I still love the gun. But I recognize that the AR and the AK have advantages over this, just as it does have advantages over the AK. Maybe not so much the AR, but, nothing is perfect. Nothing is 100%. There are always trade-offs, and the Vz.58 is no different. And I've had many people trade in Vz.58s to the store over the year. Not because they hated them, not because they said they were unreliable, but because they couldn't customize them. They got bored with them. They couldn't, because some people like to continually mod and upgrade and update their guns, and this is just not one you're going to really have that experience with. So after owning a couple of years, they pretty much are ready to get rid of them. And keep in mind, the ergonomics on this are very 1950s, 1960s. Yes, it has a last round bolt hole open, but it has relatively small safety. I get on there 7 anyway. Not a bad location, but putting on an ergonomic or oversized safety is some work. Oversizing the mag catch is a lot of work. You have a reciprocating charging handle only on the right side. Making a lefty is a lot of work. I think you get the idea. It's a lot of work, and a lot of people like doing that to their guns because they're used to their ARs. And with the AK market, it is possible to add all that stuff to your AK. Also, it's possible to upgrade the trigger on your AK. Upgrading the trigger on your Vz.58, well, I don't think the trigger's bad. It's a military trigger, and you're pretty much stuck with what you have, for all intents and purposes. And that's the whole thing of the gun. So, in conclusion, get a Vz.58 because you want something like this. Don't get one thinking you're going to turn it into the modern combat gun, or even your highly customized gun. Because in the end, you will probably be pretty disappointed. But if you just like it because you like it, and you like the Cold War, and you like shooting guns that you form yourself around, not that you can form around you, then the Vz.58 will work. It is really cool, though. If you have any questions or comments, please do post them. And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think are the pros and cons of the gun, be it in military service or in American hands as a semi-auto? Let's discuss below. If you'd like to help support the channel, especially with ammo costs this year, please check out the link to our Patreon page. And as always, if you can't do that, we'd greatly appreciate it if you can just like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and also on behalf of Jay, we'll both catch you very soon next time.